Well, welcome to another edition of Ask the Doctor. This is our Tuesday night super call with an amazing lecturer for us. We are going to learn tonight about radical remission, surviving cancer against all odds. And the man of the hour teaches, trains, and lectures doctors all over the world. He's put in way more hours than you and I could even fathom. He's going to teach us about this topic, and then we are all able to ask as many questions as we want. So please put them in the chat. We want to hear as much as we can from you. So without any further ado, the amazing Dr. Bob Rakowski.
Hey, well, thank you, Carol. You know, this is a topic that I really enjoy teaching because there's so much misinformation about it. So last week we talked about the perfect storm of cancer. We'll just slightly review that again because that's well worth noting. Kelly Turner is a very fascinating researcher. She had a friend that had an extreme cancer battle that beat it. And notice the title, Radical Remission, Surviving Cancer Against All Odds. And she went to her oncologist and said, hey, have you ever seen this happen before? He says, well, yeah, of course. And she said, well, did you publish it? And he said, no, I don't have time for that. Well, then she started interviewing oncologists, and literally every oncologist that she had talked to had patients that had radical remission. And she decided, okay, well, if they're not going to publish it, I'm going to publish it. None of them published even a single case. Now, what's fascinating is the key 9 factors that can really make a difference. You'll notice that they all have to do with empowering the patient, with building better health in the body, mind, and spirit. And sadly, that doesn't seem to have a big enough presence in medicine, but maybe we can change that. Maybe with some good information, we can move that forward. And so here's a fascinating fact. So, I had read about the cancer statistics across the world, and you can even go back to census.gov, and this is for the US. And here's what you're going to find out. So this was US. Cancer was fatal to 1,704 people in 1850. That represented 61 in 10,000 deaths. What that means is basically 0.6% of all deaths in 1850 were related to cancer. Understand today that that's over 22%. So we're going to find out that we've actually created a cancer environment. Now, in 1860, the next census, it was still about 1 point something percent. And in Victorian England, it was less than 2%. So this was an interesting article that was published in the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine. So go back to 1880, 2% of all deaths in Victorian England were related to cancer, 6% related to cardiovascular disease. You look at now, that's nearly 70% of deaths. So how and why is that happening? And some people, have the idea that people are living longer, but that's absolutely not true. When they look at the data, if a child got to be 5 years old in Victorian England, their life expectancy was 80 years old. So there was plenty of kids that died early. There was mothers that died during childbirth. But those were the days where there was a researcher named Ignaz Semmelweis. And Semmelweis is a great story. I highly recommend, Googling him and just look up Semmelweis and the legacy of hand washing. But Semmelweis was at a teaching hospital, and his favorite instructor was actually doing an autopsy on a mother who had died after childbirth. She got some type of fever. Well, while he was doing the autopsy, the scalpel actually cut his own hand. And 2 weeks later, this favorite instructor died from a very similar cause of death that this mother did. So Semmelweis said, hey, you know what? I think maybe this dead body can transmit in something to live bodies that's not so good. And here's what I suggest, that after doctors do an autopsy, they should wash their hands before delivering a baby. Well, they thought that was so ridiculous that they actually sent him to an insane asylum where he died. Yeah, the doctor that said, wash your hands after an autopsy, before delivering a baby is a good idea. Well, ultimately he was right. That didn't save his life. But notice what Paul Clayton said. If you got to be 5, basically your life expectancy was good or better than it is today. They'd live to be about 80. And here's how those 80 years went. They would spend long days working in the field. And you know what? Their final month of life, I tell people they'd sleep in a little more, a little more, a little more. And on the last day, they'd sleep in forever. But notice that they also had 10% of the degenerative disease. That means the arthritides. And they also consumed levels of nutrients that were about 10 times normal today. Why? Because food actually had something in it that was of value. They hadn't depleted the soil yet. They didn't have things that were genetically modified. They didn't use herbicides, insecticides, fungicides. So food was actually valuable. And by the way, it wasn't processed back then. Now, if we look at what really kills us, and I think this has always been the case, I call it the deadly quartet: stress, toxins, malnutrition, and physical inactivity. I believe that stress has always been the top cause of death, and it was probably pretty significant in Victorian England. But toxins, there are over 80,000 registered toxic chemicals in the environment. Those didn't exist in Victorian England. Malnutrition, the food quality was excellent and people could get it, so they didn't have malnutrition, and they certainly didn't have physical inactivity. So those are the things that have created the modern degenerative disease and modern cancer pandemic. By review, I was at a cancer lecture 30 years ago. PhD researcher Dean Black walked into a room with 200 doctors, and he asked the question, how does a hurricane start? And the answer he wanted was a hurricane starts when conditions are just right. They then asked, how does a tornado start? Well, a tornado starts when conditions are just right. How does cancer start? Cancer starts when conditions are just right. And the conditions of cancer include low oxygen, low nutrients, high acid, chronic inflammation, and immune suppression, usually secondary to chronic distress. And in last week's Zoom, I went through literally the hundreds of thousands of medical studies that show that all of that is true. Now, I lectured at a major cancer conference about 3 years ago. And, I said, okay, how many conventional cancer therapies, chemo, radiation, 350 approved chemotherapeutics, how many of these improve any of the conditions of low oxygen, low nutrients, high acid, chronic inflammation, or immune suppression? And the answer was none of them. And then I asked, how many of these make those conditions worse? And the answer was all of them. So think about that for a moment. Why are we losing the war? Well, we're not addressing cause and effect. Now, I'm not saying that these procedures aren't ever necessary. If someone has a very effective treatment for cancer, it'd be a good idea to use it, but always change the environment that allowed the cancer to exist in the first place. So Kelly Turner's book, Radical Remission, let's look at the components. But first, let's talk about, is there any data that combining conventional and natural medicine work? And this was a really nice study. Notice it says colon cancer survival with herbal medicine and vitamins combined with standard therapy in a whole systems approach. Now, stage 1, early findings in cancer reduced death risk by 95%. So 19 of 20 deaths that would have happened conventional alone didn't happen with combination. Stage 2, 64%, almost 2 of 3. Stage 3, 29%, almost 1 in 3. Stage 4, fascinatingly enough, 75% reduction in death rate. And some might say, why? I thought that was more advanced. Well, here's what I think. I think people were a lot more motivated in stage 4 to really do what they needed to do to win. And I've seen that many, many, many times. So here are the 9 strategies. Radically change your diet. We'll give you some guidelines on that. Take control of your health. Take responsibility. And by the way, that might be the most important strategy for every aspect of your life. We call it extreme ownership. Just take charge. Make it happen. Follow your intuition. I think many times people know something isn't right, but yet they give into peer pressure or government pressure or policy pressure. I just watched a meeting with nurses in Minnesota, and they're saying that only 20 to 30% of hospital staff are giving in to the pressure for this experimental gene therapy. 20 to 30%. I can put the link in the comment later. So think about that. Why are these nurses not doing it? And here's what they said. We've seen almost no effectiveness and we've seen severe side effects. That's enough for us to not take our chances with it. So follow your intuition, using herbs and supplements with expert guidance, increasing positive emotions, releasing suppressed emotions. I would imagine if you have a suppressed emotion, it'd be negative. So increase the positive, get rid of the negative, embrace social support. There's good studies on that. I'll share that. Deepening your spiritual connection. You know what? It's fascinating that, you know, it's been said there are no atheists in foxholes. So, you know, if you're fighting for your life, why not look for, you know, the ultimate benevolence that you can find in the universe? And if you seek, you will find. Having strong reasons for living is the final one. So radically change your diet. So this is a paleo pyramid and a keto pyramid. So notice the base is going to be high quality proteins. Then we go with cruciferous type vegetables and non-starchy vegetables and even a little bit of oils. And then certain fruits near the top. I probably wouldn't have bananas on there because they raise blood sugar a little bit more than I like. But this is a very good idea. But notice what they're saying, don't eat. Don't eat bread, don't eat sugar, don't take milk, don't take rice, don't take corn, don't take beans, don't take potatoes. Probably that is the staple of most people's diet. So when I've trained on nutrition, I use a couple quotes. Jack LaLanne would say, if God made it, it's okay. If man made it, stay away. Michael Pollan, in his book, In Defense of Foods, he said, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. But I'm going to modify that. I'm going to deepen it. Eat real food, not genetically modified food, not processed food, not factory food, not fake food. And Michael Pollan in his book says, you know, something strange started happening in the 1980s. Food started flying off the shelves of grocery stores and being replaced by food-like substances. It looked like food, it smelled like food, it may have even tasted like food, but it wasn't food, it was mostly chemicals. Clean food, that's going to go without herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, or GMO. Not too much. Calorie restriction, the number one mechanism of longevity ever studied. And keep in mind that cancer is very ineffective in terms of energy processing. So the journal Carcinogenesis published this a few decades ago. Think about Genesis, the origin of cancer, the origin of cancer, said that when the body's in a calorie restricted state, the first cells that die are pre-malignant and malignant cells. Not too often, you know, everybody should probably eat only 1/3 of their day. So basically, guess what? You're going to sleep 8 hours a day. That's a pretty good idea. And then you're going to eat 8 hours a day, not for that entire 8 hours, but only in an 8-hour window. And then take an 8-hour fast once you're awake. It could be 4 hours before sleep, 4 hours after awake. Doesn't really matter how you do it. But that time window is proven to be a very powerful cancer protective as well as preventing other chronic disease. Every color has different nutrients. Every day, well, we nourish ourselves every day. And then in a way that honors your physiology, your genetics, and your body goals, mostly plants. And I share a quote from the Journal of the American Medical Association from the 1990s. At every step along the road to malignancy, plant nutrients tend to reduce the likelihood of transmission to the next phase. So basically, plant nutrients are powerful anti-cancer agents. So part 2, take control of your health. And I like this. I am, 2 of the most powerful words for what you put after them shapes your reality. Well, I am healthy. I am fit. I am pursuing, you know, my best self. All those things are powerful. But so often I would have patients come in and they'd use these words, I've got, and then they talk about their diagnoses. To date, I've never had anybody walk in and say, I've created, because that's really what is the distinction between someone who's taking charge and realize you created the perfect storm, you know, except for a very strange case. There was a case where someone picked up a radioactive rock, put it in their pocket, and actually developed a bone cancer in their hip. Well, that's pretty unique, but they still created it. They picked up the rock, they put it in their pocket. But most of us have created this perfect storm and we need to make it go away. So this poem is called Invictus. And Nelson Mandela basically recited this poem every day when he was in jail for 27 years, and he emerged a world leader. But he said, I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. So why don't we take responsibility for ourselves, for our livelihood, for our life, and make sure that we make healthy choices to stay healthy? Next, we want to follow our intuition. And you know what? Our intuition is basically in our heart. And it's been said that the longest journey that any man will take, any woman will take, any human will take is the 12 inches between their head and their heart. And when you connect those, magic happens. So why not practice on doing that every day? Listen to your heart. I did a video on James Allen's As a Man Thinketh, and think about that quote, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And you might ask, does your heart think? Well, literally every cell of your body can, and that heart is the center of emotion, the center of love, and the symbol of love. And why not be loving towards everyone and everything, and especially towards yourself? Follow that intuition. So this is Linda, and I'm going to fast forward in this because the first time I saw her, she came in and she had gestational diabetes that lasted 7 years. And the pregnancy before that, she had gestational diabetes and she had a stillbirth. So that was absolutely horrible. But here it's pretty fascinating because she talks about how she got better so fast. Within 2 weeks, she felt better than she felt in years. And when her son got brain cancer, she realized that he needed to be in our office. So I'll start this here. So tell me about this last week. How's this last week? Put Linda on a very aggressive program where we had her doing really.
Dr. Bob, the volume's a little bit low.
Oh,
consistently
thank you.
Going down. In fact, to the point where you were afraid. You even ate 3 grapes at the grocery store real fast to keep your sugar up. Okay, it is November 16th of 2006. We have Linda and Drake Gunther here. And Drake's our little superstar movie star today. And we've seen him for just a little over a month now. Drake, how are you feeling, buddy? You feel good? And you're doing great. And your therapies are working wonderful. And you're a superstar with your nutrients. But Mom, you said something real powerful just a few minutes ago. Do you remember what you said?
Oh, I said that I really felt like God sent me here because I was feeling really sick and I came and I felt so much better after 2 weeks of coming to Dr. Bob. And then I found out Drake had cancer and I brought him. And I just felt like it was meant to be that we're here.
So I tend to pause that there. And so first and foremost, notice what Linda said. She felt so much better after 2 weeks. So here's the fact. She felt absolutely miserable the first week. And when you put people through an intense detox or a diabetic shift, a lot of times they feel bad. So I tell them, look, if you need to back it off, slow down the intensity, you can. Or if you tough it out, it'll be over faster. She toughed it out. 2 weeks later, she felt better. And when I teach this, I tell them, you know what, if God sends you a patient, you're probably going to do really well. So think about what she said. I really felt like God sent me here. So then we'll fast forward to Drake's epic cancer progress.
Yeah, and he's doing great and he's amazing and doing great with the nutrients. And can we talk about his condition just a little bit? And his brain tumor is shrinking, yes, which is absolutely fantastic. And so we're just going to keep up the great work and keep you healthy. And no, you're going to be a movie star today and a superstar for a long time. So, Mom, do I have your permission to share this information with doctors, students, and patients everywhere? And how about you, Drake? Do I have your permission to share it? Yeah. Okay. And last thing, do you have advice for future patients?
I don't know. Eat right.
Yeah, I like that start. That's a good start. The last time when I ended your video, you said all those things. Eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right every day.
That's right.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're very proud of you. Proud of both of you. So thank you so much for being so health conscious and such terrific patients.
We are rolling. It is June 16, 2010. We have Linda, Drake, and DJ Gunther here. We've now seen the entire family, but Drake, was subject of the video, actually Linda too, but Drake had a brain tumor. And tell us about how Drake is doing today.
He's doing very well. He is doing really good at school. He's going into the 4th grade. He made the AB honor roll.
How's his cancer?
It's very good. There's no evidence of cancer in his body at the moment.
Well, let's just say it's gone. I like that term better. It's gone. So how did he do throughout therapy compared to the other kids?
He did very well. Nutritionally, he did much better, they said.
Much better than,
Different.
okay. And why was that?
Normally they have to put him on the feeding tubes and all kinds of extra things, and he didn't have to go through any of that.
So what did Drake do that worked?
The supplements that you recommended.
Perfect. But you decided not to tell the doctors about that.
I was scared they'd tell me not to.
But you knew it was the right thing to do.
I felt it in my heart.
Okay. Do I have
So there's a couple things I wanted to say with that. So notice what Linda said. She felt it in her heart. Now, keep in mind, I've had plenty of patients when they share good nutrition protocols with their doctors say, stop that immediately. We don't want you doing any of that. And they ask, well, why not? And they say, well, it might interfere with chemo. Now, the data is if you alkalize the external environment, you decrease the invasiveness and metastatic capacity of cancer, and you increase response to chemotherapeutic agents. When you use good nutrients, you actually enhance the killing effect of chemo and radiation while protecting normal cells. But a very, very fascinating case. And so if we go back to the statement where she said, well, normally they'd have to put them on feeding tubes. Well, what happens when they put these kids on feeding tubes? I'll tell you what, the outcome is not good. These are kids that are typically going to die. And notice they didn't have to do that with Drake. And then why didn't you discuss it with the doctors? I was afraid they'd tell me not to. And why were you afraid of that? Well, that's what they told other people. Other people would say, can I give my son a vitamin? No, absolutely not. Well, that's absurd. That's one of the most ridiculous things ever. And as we share this information about radical remission, understand that all these people did stuff like that and beat cancer when they weren't supposed to. So what do we do at nutrition? We showed the diet. This is my nutrition pyramid. We've got nature's foods, superfoods, functional foods, multivitamin, multimineral, omega-3s with resolvins, probiotics, D3, K2. I recommend all of those. When we start talking about superfoods, Ganoderma lucidum, the top one, also known as reishi, hundreds of studies on the anti-cancer benefits, and in and of itself, it unwinds the perfect storm of cancer and is proven to have direct action against 15 different types of cancer. Functional foods detox is what I tend to support in cancer patients. So now, use herbs and supplements under the direction of doctors. So this is a 2018 PubMed study. And notice what it says. After more than 40 years of clinical use, its efficacy, that's its effectiveness, its safety, and long-term tolerability, long-term have been long recognized by neurologists. It reduces adverse reactions and improves the quality of life for cancer patients during chemotherapy. Notice what they said. After 40 years of data, is 40 years enough for something to be standard of care? I would think it would be. This PubMed shows that Ganoderma actually abolishes chemo resistance, makes it go away. What is chemo resistance? The cancer learns to fight back against the chemotherapy. Well, with Ganoderma, it has a much greater probability of that chemo actually killing the cancer. It's going to protect the heart from a chemotherapy that's known to damage the heart, known as doxorubicin. It also enhances the killing effect. It protects the kidneys from cisplatin, which is horrible on the kidneys, and enhances the killing effect. It enhances the killing effect of radiation while protecting normal cells. And again, it ought to be standard of care. It is in my clinic, and we've seen profound benefits with it. And there are many of the PubMed studies. If you were to take a screenshot, you can see all the cancers that it's proven against: breast, prostate, inflammatory breast, leukemia, lymphoma, multiple myeloma, cervical cancer, melanoma, lung cancer, pancreatic cancer, colorectal cancer, liver cancer, glioblastoma is the most aggressive brain cancer, endometrial cancer, gastric cancer, bladder cancer. Think about that. Medicine has a horrible success rate with lung cancer, pancreatic cancer, glioblastoma, and yet Ganoderma is helpful for the worst of the worst. Number 5, increased positive emotions. And here's what we know. There's a term called psychoneuroimmunology. And quite simply, anything that produces a good emotion also produces good chemistry to make the immune system work better. And then when we start looking at the effects of gratitude, it's very, very fascinating that there are literally hundreds of medical studies on the health enhancing, immune enhancing benefits of gratitude. You want to release suppressed emotions. And, you know, some of these studies, I have the PubMed citation listed at the bottom, but it's fascinating. They had some very, very clever ways of finding out, you know, if people actually released suppressed emotions or didn't. And when they didn't, 170% increased probability of dying from cancer. What about social support? Well, isolated women that didn't have a good social support group, 64% more likely to die, you know, from breast cancer, and 69% from any cause. So we are social animals, and we want to have a good community. So what about, you know, deepening your spiritual connections? This is the Annals of Oncology, a study in a cancer journal. Integrating spirituality as essential domain of healthcare will result in better health outcomes, particularly quality of life for patients across the trajectory of cancer care. So there's definitely something to spirituality. Love, Medicine, and Miracles. This was a book by Bernie Siegel. And what's fascinating, my very first major conference that I was a lecturer at, I was the guy that spoke immediately after the keynote speaker, Bernie Siegel. And he was presenting his findings in Love, Medicine, and Miracles. And he had a group of patients called ECAPs, exceptional cancer patients. And he said, you know what, when they had a strong reason for living, well, they would, you know, have a much better probability of survival. And so Bernie Siegel would ask all these questions of these cancer patients. And he said the best indicator was their answer to the question, do you want to live to be 100? So I tell people my first couple of years in clinical practice, I didn't take on any cancer patients. You know, I had patients come in with cancer and I'd say, look, I don't know enough about it, but let me send you out to someone that I respect. And then I'd follow them. I would follow the protocols that they put together. You know, and after I sent out a couple dozen patients, I came to realize it doesn't look like they're doing anything special. So I said, okay, I'm going to dedicate a year to studying nutrition and cancer. And I would read about, you know, 20 articles a week on nutrition and cancer. Well, multiply that out by 50 weeks, that's 1,000 articles. That's going to give you a pretty good start. And so the following year, I took on my very first nutrition and cancer patient, and it was a woman who was having her third bout with cancer. This third occurrence had metastasized to her jaw, and they wanted to do chemo and radiation. But, you know, she told me, she says, you know what, I don't want to do chemo and radiation because my daughter's going to be in town this summer from Israel, and I want to spend time with her, and I don't want to be sick. I said, okay, well, that sounds like a good reason. And then I asked her the question, do you want to live to be 100? And she looked at me and she shook her head. She said, no, I don't want to live to be 100. Well, Bernie Siegel didn't say what to do in this book when people said that. So I looked at her and I asked, well, how long do you want to live? She said, I want to live another 13 years. And I said, what happens in 13 years? She said, well, my youngest grandson will have his bar mitzvah and I want to be there. And I said, all right, well, let's start on that path. So maybe she was, you know, in late spring, and I put her on a protocol all through summer, and she was very compliant. Well, in the fall, she went to the largest cancer hospital in the world in Houston, Texas, and had her pre-chemo workup. You know, if we were a live group, I'd say, and guess what they found? And you know what, most people guess, or some people guess, they found nothing. And that's exactly right. Her cancer was completely gone. So with those natural therapies, it worked. Her cancer just resolved on its own. So how beautiful is that? A quote from Bernie Siegel. He says, if you see what you're doing each day as your way of loving the world and helping it heal, then life gets to be a lot different. The difference between burning up and burning out is the difference between loving what you are doing and not loving it. So let's do what we love and love what we do and love ourselves and everybody around. And that's a really good strategy. And that would probably be in and of itself a huge starting point to making sure that this perfect storm, low oxygen, low nutrients, high acid, chronic inflammation, and immune suppression never builds to the point where cancer happens. Those are the 9 strategies. Change your diet, paleo, keto, intermittent fasting, every color, every day. Take full control of your health, follow your intuition, get expert guidance with herbs and supplements, increase those positive emotions, get rid of the negative baggage, get a good support team around you, deepen your spiritual connection, and have a strong reason for living. And that wraps up the 9 components of radical remission.
Well, that was some amazing information tonight, right, guys?
So
Look at
Carol,
everybody.
I think I'm going to stop the first part of the recording because that'll be easier to share.
Perfect.
And then I will